Multinational prisoner exchange now unfolding. The president calling the deal, quote, a feat of diplomacy. ABC News has learned former U.S. Marine Paul Whelan and Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich are being released as part of a 24-person swap involving the U.S., Russia, Germany, Norway, Poland, and Slovenia. 16 prisoners are being turned over by Russia in exchange for 8 prisoners held in the U.S. and other countries. The exchange taking place at the airport in Ankara, Turkey. In a statement, the Wall Street Journal saying Evan is free and on his way home. Also saying it is a joyous day for Evan. A joyous day for Evan's family, friends, and colleagues. Gershkovich, you'll remember, was sentenced to 16 years in prison for espionage during what the U.S. called a sham trial. Whelan was also convicted of spying, which he has strongly denied. He was arrested in December back in 2018. President Biden has made winning the release of detained Americans in Russia a top priority since taking office. And we know that President Biden has met with the families of Whelan and Gershkovich. We are waiting right now. You can see the podium there all set up for President Biden to come and make these statements. But while we do wait, let's go back to ABC's chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce. And Mary, we do expect, or at least we know, that President Biden was meeting with some of the families. What do we expect to see here in the coming moments?
We were told that the president this morning gathered the families of those Americans who are now on their way home, wanting to tell them the news himself this morning in the Oval Office. This is something that the president and this administration have been working on for months, years. This took detailed, painstaking negotiations and is now a historic deal. This is the largest, most complex prisoner exchange since the end of the Cold War. The president himself getting directly involved at points, having conversations leader to leader. We are even told that on the very day that the president announced he was not seeking re-election, as the president was recovering from COVID, he was working the phones trying to get this deal done. I suspect you will hear him celebrate this moment not only as a remarkable moment in American diplomacy, but also as a moment to really celebrate the importance of these relationships that the U.S. has with our allies to come together and secure this kind of a deal. I suspect he will also, again, reiterate his tireless work and continued work to try and bring home all Americans who continue to be wrongfully detained in Russia and around the world. But this is certainly a moment to pause here today at this administration and celebrate this remarkable moment in history. And certainly, what a moment for these families who have spent so much time working, advocating, working behind the scenes with this administration, hoping and praying that they would one day be able to have this moment with.
Absolutely, and a prisoner exchange that we haven't seen the likes of in decades, going back to the end of the Cold War. Also, while we wait for the president here, just more on this statement saying that the 3 American citizens, this from President Biden, and 1 American green card holder who are unjustly imprisoned in Russia are finally coming home. We were watching some of the images coming out of Ankara, Turkey. We saw some of the planes coming in. It was unclear exactly which plane was holding the prisoners, but up to 7 countries involved in this exchange. This is some of the video that we saw from earlier today. And an important reminder here, Evan Gershkovich, 32 years old, he'd been in custody for a year and a half, Whelan for nearly 6 years. Here comes President Biden, and you can see some of those family members, as we expected, right behind him. Listen in.
You got everybody? Well, good afternoon. And this is a very good afternoon. A very good afternoon. Today, we're bringing home Paul, Evan, also Vladimir. 3 American citizens, 1 American green card holder. All 4 have been imprisoned unjustly in Russia. Paul for nearly 6 years. Vladimir since 2022. Evan since March of 2023. And also since October of 2023. Russian authorities arrested them, convicted them in show trials, and sentenced them to long prison terms with absolutely no legitimate reason whatsoever, none. Paul, a former Marine, was in Russia for a wedding. Evan, a journalist with a Russian, in Russia, was in Russia, assigned by the Wall Street Journal. Also a journalist, was in Russia to see family. All 3 falsely accused of being spies. And Vladimir was a Russian citizen by birth and holds an American green card. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and was a pallbearer of my friend John McCain's funeral with me. He spoke out against Putin's regime. And for that, he was convicted of treason. And now, their brutal ordeal is over, and they're free. Moments ago, the families and I were able to speak to them on the telephone from the Oval Office. They're out of Russia. Earlier today, they were flown to Turkey, and soon they'll be wheels up on their way home to see their families. This is an incredible relief for all the family members gathered here. It's relief to the friends and colleagues all across the country who've been praying for this day for a long time. The deal that made this possible was a feat of diplomacy and friendship. Friendship. Multiple countries helped get this done. They joined the difficult, complex negotiations at my request, and I personally thank them all again. I've thanked them personally, and I'll thank them again. All told, Russia has released 16 prisoners. 8 Russians who are being held in the West will be sent home as well. These 16 prisoners from Russia that Russia has released include 4 Americans, 5 Germans, 7 Russian citizens who are political prisoners in their own country. One of those Russians runs a human rights organization, Memorial, which won a Nobel Prize in 2022. Putin threw him in prison for voicing opposition to the war in Ukraine. 4 others work with Alexei Navalny, political opposition leader who died in Russia prison this year. Now they can live safely abroad and continue their work of advocating for democracy if they so choose. This deal would not have been made possible without our allies. Germany, Poland, Slovenia, Norway, and Turkey, they all stepped up and they stood with us. They stood with us. And they made bold and brave decisions, released prisoners being held in their countries who are justifiably being held, and provided logistical support to get the Americans home. So for anyone who questions whether allies matter, they do. They matter. And today is a powerful example of why it's vital to have friends in this world. Friends you can trust, work with, and depend upon, especially on matters of great consequence and sensitivity like this. Our alliances make our people safer, and we began to see that again today. Let me say this. It says a lot about the United States that we work relentlessly to free Americans who are unjustly held around the world. It also says a lot about us that this deal includes the release of Russian political prisoners. They stood up for democracy and human rights. Their own leaders threw them in prison. The United States helped secure their release as well. That's who we are in the United States. We stand for freedom, for liberty, for justice, not only for our own people, but for others as well. And that's why all Americans can take pride in what we've achieved today. I want to thank everyone in my administration who helped make this happen. Our work did not start just on day one. It started before day one. During the transition, I instructed our national security team to dig into all the cases of hostages being wrongfully detained, which were inherently, well, we inherit them from the prior administration. I wanted to make sure we hit the ground running, and we did. As of today, my administration has brought home over 70 Americans who were wrongfully detained and held hostage abroad, many since before I took office. Additionally, I issued an executive order in 2022 authorizing penalties like sanctions and travel bans on those who hold Americans against their will. And my State Department has introduced new warnings for Americans about the risk of being wrongfully detained by a foreign government. Deals like this one come with tough calls, and there are never any guarantees. But there's nothing that matters more to me than protecting Americans at home and abroad. And so we'll continue to work for the release of all wrongfully detained Americans around the world. Let me end where I began, with Paul, Evan, and also Vladimir and their families. They never gave up hope. We can't imagine what they've been through, all of you. Matter of fact, this lady right here, I think, was living in the Oval Office with us for a while. All kidding aside, can't imagine their joy right now. They're home. Tomorrow's a big day, the 13th birthday of Miriam. Miriam, where are you? Come here. You all know we have a tradition in the Biden family. We sing happy birthday on any birthday. You ready? All of you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Miriam. Happy birthday to you. Remember, no serious guys till you're 30. God love you. She's Alsu's daughter. Now she gets to celebrate with her mom. That's what this is all about. Families able to be together again, like they should have been all along. So I want to thank you again to everyone who did their part. In just a few hours, we'll welcome home our fellow Americans. We're looking forward to that. God willing, we're going to be out at Andrews and get that done. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And this is a good day.
What did you say to them on the phone, sir? What did you say when they answered the phone on the other side?
I said, welcome almost home.
How do you keep countries, these so-called abductor states, from simply taking more Americans in order to get more of their prisoners home? How do you end these perverse incentives, sir?
Or advising people not to go certain places. Tell them what's at risk, what's at stake.
These negotiations, and can you speak to the complexities of working with 6 countries to secure these releases?
Well, look, I'm not going to take the time now, but I'll do this later in the week. I particularly owe a great sense of gratitude to the Chancellor. The demands they're making of me required me to get some significant concessions from Germany, which they originally concluded they could not do because of the person in question. But everybody stepped up. Poland stepped up, Slovenia stepped up, Turkey stepped up. And it matters to have relationships. It really does. These things matter. Pardon me?
Could this improve relations with Russia? Is there any avenue for that after this prisoner exchange deal?
As my sister might say, your lips to God's ears, man.
Did you ever speak with Vladimir Putin about this, or would you be willing to speak with Putin now directly?
I don't need to speak with Putin. Anyway.
How did you weigh that decision of letting somebody out who sounds like, by the way, we heard tonight?
I got home innocent people. Thank you. All right. Thank you.
President Biden making those remarks from the White House.
Say that again?
Are you speaking with President Erdogan or the leaders about this?
Yes, I've spoken to all the leaders about this.
What do you say about
And by the way, as a father, look, you heard me say this before. I mean it. My dad had a simple proposition. Family is the beginning, the middle, and the end. Blood of my blood, bone of my bone. I can think of nothing more consequential. I mean it sincerely. And having lost family, not a different way, and not knowing what's happening, the circumstance with their accident, health, it matters.
Mr. President, what did Germany ask for in response for their cooperation?
Nothing.
President
President
Trump has said repeatedly that he could have gotten the hostages out without giving anything in exchange. What do you say to that? What do you say to President Trump now, former president?
Why didn't he do it when he's president?
Sir, what did you say?
Okay, forgive me for the interruption earlier. President Biden sometimes has a tendency to walk away from the microphone, then walk back to it to answer some questions there. But as you saw, the president joined by the family members of those 4 Americans who are now coming home. That included the family of Paul Whelan, Evan Gershkovich. And also you saw there that moment, the daughter of Alsu Kermosheva, the president asking everyone in the room to sing her happy birthday, her mother now coming home after this historic prisoner exchange. Let's go back to our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce, because, Mary, there are a number of things that the president outlined here and very much highlighting the feat of diplomacy and friendship, touting the importance of our allies and good relationships around the world.
With the president stressing this is why allies matter. The president working very closely with those other countries to get this across the finish line. And the president recognizing, look, these were bold decisions, difficult decisions to bring these people home. Of course, 16 individuals held in Russia are now being freed. The president noting some of them are Russian political prisoners. Russia, in exchange, then releasing 8 individuals that were held by the U.S., Germany, Norway, Slovenia, and Poland. But it is really remarkable, the president saying that this speaks to the importance of diplomacy and friendship. Of course, there at the end, he was asked about the fact that Donald Trump has claimed that he could have done this without, releasing anyone in exchange. And he, said there pointedly, well, then why didn't he do it? But the president stating very bluntly what is true, that this is a good day. He said that he was able to get on the phone in the Oval Office with the families as they were finally able to speak to their loved ones as they are now returning home. The president's message to them, a simple one: welcome almost home.
Mary Bruce, thank you. Let's bring in Tom Sufi-Burrage, who is following this from overseas. And Tom, we mentioned the unprecedented nature of this, the largest prisoner swap since the Cold War. 24 people at least involved. And we know one of them, a Russian who is being held in Germany, accused of murdering someone on the streets there, an accused assassin. There will be questions moving forward about whether or not this was an even exchange, and does this only encourage Russia to take more Americans into custody to use as leverage pieces for negotiations going forward?
Yeah, and I think U.S. officials today have told us, look, difficult decisions had to be made. There was a trade-off here. Yes, 16 individuals were released from Russian prisons, but 8 had to come out of European and American prisons, including 3 out of U.S. custody, including the son of a Russian lawmaker involved in a mass fraud scheme, also a Russian businessman involved in a $93 million scheme to hack into American corporations for his own profit, and also a Russian intelligence officer, we're now hearing fascinating details. This individual was accused and convicted of tapping into supplying potentially sensitive American electronic hardware and ammunition, which Russia potentially was going to use for its war in Ukraine. So there is a trade-off. And yes, the key individual was Vadim Krasikov. He's been held here in Germany. He assassinated a Chechen rebel in broad daylight 5 years ago in a park just over there in Berlin. And he was the key individual that Vladimir Putin wanted out. It had to happen. The White House U.S. officials saying it was not an easy thing to convince the Germans, and that's why you're seeing a significant number. 5 of the 16 are German citizens that have been freed today.
Tom Sufi-Burrage, thank you. We know for the families involved, this has been an agonizing wait as these negotiations played out behind the scenes. We want to play a clip of an interview from back in March. Our George Stephanopoulos spoke with Evan Gershkovich's family about the 1-year anniversary from the time that he was taken into custody. Let's listen.
What's the first thing you're going to do when he comes home?
I don't even know. I just wouldn't let him out anywhere for several days at least.
Well, that is what they were hoping for months ago, and that is what's going to happen as these Americans make their way back home. ABC's Patrick Reevell is joining us now. Patrick, I know you've been in touch with the family members, with friends and colleagues. What are you hearing from them today?
Yeah, I mean, this is just such an extraordinary and wonderful moment, obviously, for the families. As President Biden said, ultimately, this is about families and reuniting them, seeing the relatives there on stage. I saw the sister of Paul Whelan was standing on the stage there, Elizabeth. I know from meeting her over the years just how much she has lobbied, how hard she's lobbied to get her brother home over this appalling ordeal that lasted 5 years. We also saw, of course, the parents there of Evan standing with the president. This is a moment that they've been dreaming of. I think it's important to say Evan was very well known to the media community in Moscow. When I knew him personally there, when I was working there, he had many friends among the journalists there. He was known as an incredibly committed journalist, someone who believed that it was crucial that the world understand Russia during the war in Ukraine. He chose to go back there, even though most Western journalists had decided it was too dangerous to go there after the war. He paid a terrible, unjust price going there and being arrested on a reporting trip. And Paul Whelan as well, I remember covering his arrest all the way back in 2018. And then in 2020, I spoke to him from a prison camp there. where he described the conditions, saying, you know, it was Dickensian, that he was trapped on bunks. There are just many other prisoners in this former gulag. So it's just a huge moment. We've also got a statement from the Whelan family, from his twin brother David, who for many years has just been putting out statements almost weekly, trying to update people on Paul's conditions. Finally, he's saying he is free. He's saying now that they want privacy, that Paul will receive support from the US government, as other hostages have in the past. And that is what we've seen previously when Brittany Griner was freed, when Trevor Reed was freed. They underwent counseling at a military base down in Texas. They were given support with counseling. But, I think much of the celebrations will only begin once these people are back on American soil.
And Patrick, that's why there was so much anxiety this morning when we were getting reports of this possible exchange, but the families holding on tight, wanting to make sure that this actually went through and was successful with everyone safe. Patrick, thank you so much. We do also have a statement here from Vice President Kamala Harris, now the presumptive Democratic nominee. She writes in part, "It gives me great comfort to know that their horrible ordeal is over and that they will soon be reunited with their families." Also echoing President Biden here, saying that the president and I will not stop working until every American who is wrongfully detained or held hostage is brought home. Let's bring in our chief global affairs correspondent, Martha Raddatz, who's joining us on the phone right now. And Martha, what does this mean for U.S. and Russia relations, the big picture here going forward? Because there's also a question about possible talks about Ukraine and some of the next steps there.
Well, you heard President Biden himself criticize Russia right away. So I don't see a lot changing with Russia. This is just on a completely different track, these kinds of negotiations. You heard the president say these were show trials. There was no legitimate reason to hold these people. All three were falsely accused of being spies. But for President Biden, you have to know that after these last few months, after stepping aside in this election, after the debate, after the interviews he did, this has to be a highlight for him and his administration, and to show the power of diplomacy and the work they have done with allies. Sure, he will be criticized. The administration will be criticized for what was traded. But President Biden made the point again and again that our alliances make people safer. He said this says a lot about the United States, that we work to free not only Americans, but those Russian political prisoners. This really was a surprise to everyone, especially the release of Evan Gershkovich so quickly after he'd been sentenced to 16 years. But I think when you look back, there were some clues there. His defense attorney wrapped up things very quickly, and Russia has not released people they accused of being a spy until they are convicted. I am also thinking and listening to Patrick especially about knowing these people who are being released. This is a very difficult transition. There, of course, is great joy for the family, great joy for Evan and Paul and the others. But we look back on Brittany Griner, it was a very difficult transition. You start to remember what you've been through, and I don't think we know the half of what they have been through.
Yeah, Gershkovich has been there for almost a year and a half. Whelan for nearly 6 years in those prison camps. Martha Raddatz for us, thank you so much. We truly appreciate it, and our entire team. Our coverage continues throughout the day on ABC News Live and abcnews.com. We'll have a full wrap-up on world news tonight. For now, we'll send you back to regular programming. I'm Wade Johnson in New York. Have a great day.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
And back here with local news in Chicago, your